time for us to check back in with the family history and stories of Opal Myers. If you've missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. Mrs. Pierce and her children. Sometimes I wouldn't give them a choice. They just automatically got the whipping anytime a student did something that was dangerous or could harm another student, like what happened with Curtis Pierce. You see, one day Curtis found a big old lizard and started chasing the girls with it. Of course, they were all running around, screaming and squealing. Well, he caught this one little girl and pulled out the collar of her dress and put that lizard down her back. It was a big lizard. That poor little girl took off running in circles screaming. I had to catch her before I could get the lizard out of her dress. Then I found me a switch and whipped Curtis. Of course, he went crying home and told his mother. There was one house between the Pierces and the school. The lady who lived there said she saw Curtis coming from school crying, and the next thing she knew, Mrs. Pierce was coming back towards the school just a-talking to herself, saying, "I'll whoop her, I'll whoop her, I'll whoop her, I'll whoop her. She whooped Curtis, and I'll whoop her." A few minutes later, she saw Mrs. Pierce heading back home saying, "I'll whoop him, I'll whoop him, I'll whoop him when I get home." The neighbor asked her, "Mercy me, what's the matter?" "She whooped Curtis, and I thought she beat him for nothing. I got up there and found out he'd put a lizard down that little girl's dress. I'm going to go back and wear him out." She didn't say a thing to me. I didn't even see her. When she got up to the schoolhouse, some of the girls told her what had happened and said that he for sure deserved every whack. Somehow I believe that Curtis most likely got 2 whippings that day. Mrs. Pierce was not a well person. People said that she had some kind of a stroke that messed up her mind. Others said it seemed like somebody shot off a firecracker too close to her and it messed up her nerves. She was always terribly nervous and easily upset. Mrs. Pierce raised a big crowd of children. I don't know for sure, but I think there were about 10 in all. I have to say, she raised them all with morals. She was strict with her children, especially when it came to treating other people right and keeping up their responsibilities. She meant for her children to do right, but you had better believe she wanted to make sure people didn't do wrong by her children either. The Pierces owned a real big place right down below Lawton's and back up in the hills. In the 30s and 40s, it was hard to get money. Even though Mr. Pierce was a good worker, they had it pretty tough getting all that land paid for and raising all those young'uns. The Pierce children all did real good in school and were usually well behaved. Troy was a little slow at first, and he couldn't talk real plain when he first started school in the 1st grade. One day I was trying to teach him this poem. Birdie with a yellow bill hopped up on the windowsill, cocked his shiny eye and said, "Ain't you ashamed, you sleepy head?" When I taught the little ones poetry, I would usually say each line and have them repeat it. So when I said to Troy, "Birdie with a yellow bill," he covered his mouth with his hand and started snickering. So I repeated, "Troy, say Birdie with a yellow bill." He looked around at Bertie Ellison sitting over on the other side of the room and snickered. "Birdie ain't got no yellow bill." I had to explain to him that this poem was talking about a little bitty bird and not Bertie Ellison. Troy was real good. All the children were, even mischievous little Curtis. Troy grew up and married a Christian girl, and his son is now a minister. Dorothy, one of the girls in the family, stayed with me for a while after Desmer got married and took care of Corinne. Later, she married a man that worked for the light company. Mamie was the only one of the Pierces who went on to high school. I always talked to all of my students and encouraged them to get as much education as they could. I told them about boarding schools like the one I went to, but the Pierces didn't want any of their children to go on to high school. I don't know why. Maybe they wanted the children to stay there and help them work the land, or I guess they could have been afraid that they would get out of the community and never come back. I don't know how Mamie got to go, but she did real well in high school and earned a scholarship to go on to college. She became a teacher and met this man who was a meteorologist and married him. He had a good job, and she taught for a long time. They both retired about 2 years ago and have been traveling all over the United States. I just got a letter from her, and she told me about how they went to Switzerland and some other places this past summer. That child has just been about everywhere. I guess Mamie bought out all the other children because she now owns and rents out all the land that her folks owned. They all married and made for themselves a decent life, except the oldest girl, who married a boy from the community. He never did do much or own any property or anything. He tended to move around from here to there. They said he was sick a lot, and he's been dead now for several years. The best way for a girl to make it back then was to marry someone from outside the community with a good education who knew how to work and do things. The oldest girl's daughter lived up here in the Click House for a while. She married the man who handled snakes down at the Church of God in the Name of Jesus. He raised copperheads and kept them in a box up there in their home. I didn't like the idea of having so many snakes that close. Setting up housekeeping. Ben was at our house a lot and ate with us most every night. One day when I came home from school, Mama looked sickly and Ben was sitting there doing the churning for her. I thought that was the funniest thing he'd ever pulled. Papa and Burl never worked in the house, but Ben would cook and churn and wash or do anything that needed to be done. He was a big help to them. After a while, Ben and I started talking about setting up housekeeping. A good friend of mine, who knew we were married, said, "If yuns want to move to that house down there closer to the school, I'll rent it out to you. I won't tell anyone you're married and living there together, so I won't say a word." That was for sure something to consider, because if the children got to school before me, they had to stand out in the snow and cold until I got there with the key. It would be almost as cold inside the school as it was outside until I got the fire going. And even then, it would take a good while for the school to warm up. If we lived there close to the school, Ben could slip over and make a fire early in the morning, and they'd never see him. We could have the room hot, or at least warm, by the time the children came. It seemed like that would be a good thing to do, so that's exactly what we did. We didn't need too much more to set up housekeeping. After living away at school for 6 years, I already had a lot of what our home required. I had my own bed, 2 sheets, 2 blankets, 2 plates, 2 cups, and 2 saucers, 2 of everything. I didn't have too much, but what I did have would be a good start. The next time I was in town, I found a cabinet, stove, and several other things for only $25. That was pretty cheap. Then there was some old lady down here selling out, and we got some more dishes, pans, mops, and other things from her. We also bought 6 white plates, some white soup beans, and a big pot. I got some domestic and made us 2 good straw ticks. We bought things like that here and there as we had the money. The cupboards I bought were like kitchen cabinets now, except that they were just shelves. They didn't have doors. I took paper and notched it out with scissors, making all kinds of curlicues, holes, and flowers in it, and put it on the front of the shelves to cover them up and make them pretty. When it got dirty or wet, I would put up new paper with maybe new designs. I put some more of that pretty paper around our medicine shelf. One night, a while after we moved in there, I was sick, so I went to my medicine shelf to get something to take. I put my candle on the shelf so I could see better. Guess I didn't set it down just right because it fell over and the paper caught on fire. That's when I decided to tear it all down and not to use paper to decorate with anymore. In February of 1935, the Presbyterians let us rent the mission house. After we moved in, we decided to make another bed. That way, when we had other visitors, we'd have somewhere for them to sleep. We used the old pieces of wood that we had taken off the kitchen roof at Mama's to make the box-like frame and the slats. Then we cut down trees to make 4 posts, one for each corner of the frame. We put one of our straw ticks on that, and then all I needed were the pillows and quilts. The county officials never did say anything about me being married. They may have never found out, or maybe they just didn't care, and I had done all that sneaking around and worrying for nothing. It was during my 2nd year teaching at Sand Hill that I became pregnant with Corinne. Kitchen and feeding program at Rose School. When I started back teaching after Corinne was born, I was assigned to Rose School. Desmer, who was still living at home with Mama and Papa, said that she would help me with Corinne while I taught. I had to get up before daylight to get ready, feed Corinne, get her things together, and take her down to Mama's. Then I'd have to walk back home to get the things I needed to take to school. It was just too much to take Corinne and everything else in one trip. And then I would have to walk all the way to school, which was a long way off. Late fall through midwinter, I walked most of that way in the dark. Starting around the 1st of October, Desmer would come over every evening and spend the night at our house. That way, I didn't have to be concerned with getting Corinne up and ready. She could sleep later, and Desmer would take her down to Mama's after the sun came up and it got a little warmer. That made it so much easier for me. Desmer was so good to help me and to help Mama too. Desmer and I had never been real close. I'd always liked her, but I guess because of the 8-year difference in our ages, we just never got to know each other. She was still a little girl when I left here to go to school in Kentucky, and when I was back home during the summers, I was always busy working or doing something. But in the end, Desmer has been closer to me than all the rest of my sisters. Beatrice and Velmer moved away. Desmer did move off for a few years too, just after she married, but she came back. And for a while, Maggie lived close, but later she moved too. Since then, it's just been me and Desmer for all these years. Things were pretty much the same at Rowe as they had been at Davis and Sand Hill, except I had a lot more children whose parents didn't take very good care of them. I told Desmer how the condition of some of the students was pitiful. I know some of those young'uns don't get enough to eat at home, and they hardly have enough in their lunches to give them the strength to make it through the rest of the day. I just don't know what I'm going to do about it. We've got to think of some way to help them. Well, Desmer and I started cooking food for me to take to school. We'd make big pans of biscuits, cornbread, and sometimes gingerbread cookies. Of course, we had to give food to all the students so that the ones who really needed it wouldn't feel bad or embarrassed about someone giving them charity. Before long, others began donating food. Some would bring a bushel of beans or maybe corn. The Freemans, who owned a store and the furniture shops, lived up there not far from the school, and they sent food. Mrs. Freeman even canned fruit for the children and sent fresh apples. Her own twins, Roland and Roger, were students at the school, and though they had plenty and would be considered by any up here to be rich, they acted just like all the other children. They were real nice and didn't consider themselves to be the least bit better than anyone else. We did that both years I was at Rowe, and when I was moved to Sand Hill again, we started a food program there too. I found out that if we had the backing of the school district and a kitchen at the school, I would be able to get food from the government. The superintendent and school board didn't want to listen to me, but I knew if I kept pushing, I could make it happen. It took a lot of work to get the meal program started. It took getting the whole community to go in and get a hold of the superintendent. You know, it's really a shame that the school district didn't come up with this idea themselves. The 8th graders helped me build a lean-to kitchen onto the school. In no time, I was able to get food like eggs, flour, raisins, and dried peaches from the government welfare program. The parents brought food too. We had dozens of jars of canned tomatoes, and in the fall they would bring in dried peas and beans. Pretty soon we were getting so much food from the government and community we had to build storage shelves. The government even paid Desmer and 3 other girls to cook. They got $38 a month and they thought they were rich. Desmer was thrilled. Being the youngest in our family, she always got the old hand-me-downs. That was the first time she had ever been able to buy a dress for herself. Miss Minnie and Mrs. Click were good to help me with Corinne. I just couldn't have made it without them. In 1939, Papa was having some serious money problems. He was in debt and went in more debt to buy a cow. Then when the crops didn't make it that year, there was nothing else he could do but sell his part of the original corn place. He sold his 60 acres to the McMahons, and a little later they sold it to Frank Turner. Mama and Papa moved into a log house just off the highway, back up in the hollow, down there by Stone Mountain Recreation Park. Papa farmed some with a man who lived down there, but his health was deteriorating. Papa was so unusually heavy that it was really hard on him to do too much. After Mama and Papa moved, Desmer stayed at the mission with us a lot until she married Mont McMahan in October of 1941 when she was 22 years old. Mont was closer to my age, about 7 years older than Desmer. She and Mont had dated on and off for 5 years. She had dated this boy named Henry, who was in the Army, and she was actually engaged to him for a while. He deserted the Army, and she tried for a while to get him to go back, but he wouldn't do it. She wouldn't have anything to do with him after that. Mont was a good worker and always provided for Desmer and their family. The McMahans had moved to South Carolina when Mont was 12 years old and then moved back and forth from South Carolina to here for several years. After they married, she and Mont moved to South Carolina and stayed there until 1943. When they moved back, they lived just across the hill from us for a long time, you know, up there where the peach orchard used to be. They lived on across that little ridge and still lived up there when the mission burned. Even after Desmer and Mont moved into town, I would visit her every chance I got. Now, when one of the boys needs to go into town for groceries or some other shopping, they always take me down to our house to visit. We talk on the phone a lot, too. Boys go skinny dipping. When I was teaching at Rose School, I had 3 boys who would sneak away from school to go skinny dipping. I knew I had to think up something that would keep a 13, 14, and 15-year-old from going swimming during school time. Boys that age can be pretty easy to embarrass, so I thought that if I could sneak down to the creek and grab their clothes, that might just do it. But I had to make sure that I wouldn't catch them out of the water, or I might be the one who was embarrassed. I came up with a plan. One day I told the girls that I was taking them on a field trip to see how many different leaves we could find. I told them I had something to do and that I would catch up with them down the road. The directions I gave them would take them right past where the boys were swimming. The boys would be able to hear them coming, but the girls would not be able to see them. I waited a few minutes after the girls left, then headed down the road. Sure enough, when the boys heard the group of girls go by, they hit the creek, and I went down the bank and picked up all their clothes. "Let us have our clothes," they shouted. "Let us have our clothes." "No, sir, you come and get your clothes." "Not me. You either go without 'em or you come get 'em out of my hand." So I turned my back and hung out a pair of pants and said, "Whoever these belongs to, you come and get 'em. I'll keep my back turned until you get them on, but I'll not give them to you until you come and get them right out of my hand." It just tickled the life out of me because I knew those boys were so embarrassed that they were just dying when they came out of the water and got their clothes. They put the clothes on their wet bodies and took off down the path. The girls saw them coming out the path and had a well-deserved laugh at them. One of the boys lived pretty close, and he was still wet when he got home, but I never did hear anything from the parents, so they must have agreed with the way I handled the situation. But most likely, those boys didn't say a word to their folks about what I had done. Usually, if the parents didn't like what you did or the punishment you put on the children, they'd send a note. I never heard a word from anyone, and the boys never went to the swimming hole again during class time. It's hard to outsmart Opal, isn't it? All those students, her students should have realized that. A good place to end right there. I like when she says, I could just hear, I wonder, I don't know, of course, if she would have said it like Pap, but she says, when she said they put their clothes on their wet bodies, Pap would have said they put their clothes on their wet bodies. He would have said bodies. So I wonder if that's how she said it. She got them good, though, didn't she? And she knew that if she just embarrassed them, they'd never take that chance again. That is an embarrassing age for boys or girls, either one, for both of them. So this was an interesting peek into Opal's now married life in this part. Now they finally get to set up housekeeping, so that was exciting to hear. I like how it started with her talking about the Pierce children and the Pierce family. And little Curtis, he was mean. He put the lizard down the little girl's back, so that was interesting too, that part. But I especially loved Troy when she was teaching Troy the little poem, and he thought that she was saying birdie, B-E-R-T-I-E, like birdie, that was a name, instead of birdie, B-I-R-D-I-E, like a little birdie tweeting. You probably hear some of the birdies around here tweeting. I thought that was so, so sweet. Then she mentioned in this part a little bit about it wasn't about the Pierce family, but the other one about married into a family, one of them married into a family that had snake handling. So I don't know if you've ever heard of that or not. I have, and often people will say, you know, or maybe it's one of the kind of, I guess one of the lesser known stereotypes, but like in the mountains of Appalachia, people handle snakes. There are people like that, but I know none of them. Nobody in my area, I've never even remotely heard of people here doing something like that. So it's a very, very minute amount of people, and in very few places, I would say, in the mountains of Appalachia. But that was one of them. And I'm like Opal. I couldn't imagine raising copperheads just so then you could carry them and keeping them in your house. Crazy, huh? Very crazy. I love the part about when she'd come home every day. This is before they'd set up housekeeping. Ben would be there because he would eat supper with them. And I love that, you know, she'd come in one day and he was churning for her mama. That was so sweet. Shows Ben was certainly a good guy and a good husband for Opal, I'm sure. It's interesting how, even in my family, I've known men who's like kind of like, that's women's work, I won't do that. But then, like, in my immediate family, Pap, he always was willing to do whatever for Granny. You know, I mean, it wasn't like, I don't really ever remember him like cleaning the bathroom or something, but I'm sure if he wanted to, he would have. I mean, if it needed it, he would have. But as far as cooking or helping or, you know, all that kind of stuff, he didn't care to do that. And I don't really remember him ever washing clothes, but I'm sure that he could if he had. It wasn't that he thought that he shouldn't because he was a man. It's probably just that Granny kept them all washed or whatever. But I know my brothers are the same way. Steve certainly helps his wife in all different ways, and from washing clothes to whatever. And now Paul does. As a bachelor, he's done it for himself, but he does it for Granny now. He'll wash her clothes or certainly cooks. He cooks pretty much everything she eats now. So, interesting how some people get real strict about that and others don't. Now Matt, y'all know, if you watch my videos, he's a great hand to help. He'll do whatever needs doing. He'll just pick it up and do it, from cleaning to, if we were churning, he would do that too. So I really liked that. It's such a different time though. Maybe that's part of the different time too. You can see that, those roles being really rigidly for most people, to where she really thought that was kind of funny that Ben was helping. But especially when they set up housekeeping, you can see the difference in the times. She goes through all those things she has two of, and that's enough. That's just enough. And then she does run into the lady selling the stuff in town and buys that. But they just start out with so little compared to even what me and Matt started out with. You know, you get to have a shower, and then usually your families help you, and it's just such a different time of, you know, I guess, materialistic in a way, but also, I mean, I'm thankful for all the things, like for me and Matt. There's still things I use in my kitchen that we got at our shower. So I'm thankful for those things. But then, you know, was it all necessary? I guess there's that balance of, it's very, very nice, the things we have today, but, you know, that was so simple and easier to, I guess, manage and take care of. And then do you really need, you know, do I really need all the frying pans? Could I just use 3 if I had 3 good ones or something? You know, it just makes you think of all those kind of things like that. I like how she was, again, Opal, so creative and smart, how she used the paper on the cabinets to make it look finished and nice, but also that she could just, if it got dirty, she could just take it down and change it for something else. And that's really interesting how she did that. Now, you could do that today. You could do the same thing. And, of course, there's people now, you can buy little moldings and trim, especially. You could paint it a different color. You could do all kinds of things to fancy it up. There's even that... I guess it's like a laminate that you can roll out and put on wood like that on the edge and iron, like heat it, almost like ironing it on. So you can still do all kinds of things like that. The most interesting thing about that, though, to me, or I guess thinking about those differences in time that made me really think, was how she was feeling bad. So she went to her, you know, the medicine cabinet there, medicine shelf. She had to take her candle with her. Like recently when I was sick, I did get up in the night to take medicine, but I went in the bathroom and turned the light on. You know, I didn't have to take a candle with me in there. What a blessed time we live in to have, you know, electricity and not have to do that. I can't imagine taking a candle everywhere I went, or a lamp, you know. We just take it for granted. You're probably like me, if your power does go off. Ours goes off sometimes. And we have candles. We don't really use the candles. We have, if it's off for a prolonged time, we have some oil lamps. We'll light those. But mostly we just use flashlights because it's just going to be off, you know, at the most, usually 4 or 5 hours or something like that. And sometimes it's during the day, so you don't need anything, but if it's at night. But can you imagine carrying a candle with you everywhere you went? And it would be such a fire hazard even today, you know, if you knock it over, if it gets too close to maybe your curtain or something. We're so blessed. Like made me think about recently, because I just got over being sick. Like I said, when I got up during the night and I wanted to take something for my fever, I just went to the bathroom and turned the light on. I didn't have to light my candle and then go in there with my candle. We were very blessed. Again, showing Opal and Ben, I guess they were just people in those days. You just had to make your own way and do what you needed to do. But interesting, when they finally get to rent the mission, the first thing they do is they're going to build a bed, so if anybody comes to visit, they'll have a place to sleep. But they use that wood, excuse me, I'm still coughing. If they use the wood from where they redid the Mama and Papa's roof. So they'd saved it. Remember at that part, she said, we're going to save this, you know, for future use. The parts that were good, the rotted parts, they got rid of. But then they went and got that, and they were able to build a bed out of it. They used that for the frame, and then they went and got them some posts. Just so amazing. Kind of like a self-sufficiency, but also waste not, want not. They didn't waste that wood that was good. And then when it come time to need it for this bed, they were self-sufficient enough that they could build the frame, but also they could go out and harvest some more trees so they could have the post. Just so amazing. And then you can really see in this part, which we already have all through the book, but the real strength of Opal. So now once she has the baby and she's gone back to school, they move her to another school and it's further away. But then she's got to backtrack the other way to take the little baby, Corinne, to her mother's house so that Desmer can keep it. Then she's got to go back to where she started, get all her stuff, and then go to school. Can you just imagine? Again, I was really blessed that I never had to take Corey and Katie to I got to stay home with them, in other words, not a babysitter or daycare or anything like that. But, you know, could you imagine if you were a mother? I think of my friends, you know, that had to, how they would have walked one way and dropped their kids off, walked back home and then walked to work. And my goodness, you know, it's hard enough just to get all the kids in the car and get them there and then get back. So, really, she was so tough, Opal, and then such determination that's what she wanted to do. You know, that was her main thing, was she was going to help people. She was going to help children. She was going to educate them so they could make better lives for themselves, but also for their families. all through that part, she really talks about Desmer. Now, that's really a unique name. You'll have to tell me, have you ever heard Desmer? I actually have. I've known, she's passed away now, but I knew a Desmer for my whole life. So that is a name that I'm familiar with. Desmer, that I knew, was a sweet lady and kind of real funny. And I always thought really beautiful. She had the prettiest skin, just really pretty skin. She was part Cherokee, so had that beautiful golden skin. But Desmer, so that's a name that I'm familiar with. You'll have to tell me if you've ever heard it. But nice how in families that big, because there were so many of them, and Opal kind of goes through, well, they moved off, all of it. Wasn't that she didn't love them as much. It's just that over the course of a lifetime, they had all left, and Desmer stayed there. So other than that little part she left, and then she come back. So her and Desmer just ended up being really, really close, even though there was those 8 years between them. They ended up being very close. That's really, really sweet. And then not only does Desmer help her with Corinne, that part, but then she helps her figure out how to feed the children at that Rose School, and then on when she goes back to Sand Hill too. But today we take for granted public school. They have, in our area, often breakfast is free for every student, just to try to encourage kids to have enough to eat. And then, you can qualify for the lunch being free or whatever too. There's some schools, some of this stuff still goes on today. I know there's some school systems, not here where I live, but in other places of Appalachia I've read about, where they have they call it a backpack program. So on Friday, they send a backpack full of food home with the child to try to make sure that they have enough food, they have ample food until they come back to school. We live in the land of plenty today. Most of us eat 3 meals and a snack, several snacks, and even a bedtime snack or whatever, so we're eating all day long. But I know a lot of teachers I've heard say they believe, if you could feed them breakfast and feed them lunch, at least they've ate twice that day, even if they don't have anything to eat when they go home. And that's really sad. That's not just here in Appalachia. That's throughout the United States. There's just situations of where there's still poverty, but then there's also, I guess, how would you say it, like lack of care. Maybe there might be a little food there. Maybe there's the money for food, but there's nobody that willing to go get it or to actually fix it for the child, which is really, really sad. But strange for us to think about at this time. There was none of that. And Opal just started her own food program. She just started it. She just figured out how to do it. In the beginning with her and Desmer cooking the big things of cornbread or biscuits or gingerbread, which would be an easier thing to cook a lot of and to carry too. And filling. Those would have been filling things. And then gradually she got people to help, and then she found out, well, if I could prove I had a kitchen, the government would supply some of this, so she did that. Just really, really amazing. And amazing that it all was because of Opal. Somebody else wouldn't have, might have said, well, I hate it for those kids, but I'm doing all I can do. But Opal said, no, I got to figure out how to fix this. I got to figure out how to fix it, and she did. She did. I thought this was... It was really sad. Now she tells us in this part, Papa lost the land. He'd went in debt, and then he went in more debt, and then he just couldn't make it, so he lost that land. I'm sure that Opal wished that at that time she could have bought it, but I don't guess her and Ben could have afforded to buy it. But that's really sad. But I found that so interesting. I always have found things like this interesting. Her talking about Desmer and her other brothers and sisters, and or her sisters and Burl, the brother. And then also the papa and the mama, where they left when they had to sell that. So all that kind of movement. I think that's so fascinating. I've recently been researching because one of my friends shared, it was something that I was writing about on the Blind Pig and the Acorn, and like the newspaper, North Carolina newspaper.com, maybe every state has one, I don't know, but you can go to that website and you can just search names. So I was writing about Granny's grandfather, Thomas Truitt, who was a pastor, a very, very well-known, very influential, very successful pastor in our area here. And so I had wrote something about it, and so he told me you could go there and put in his name, and then all these articles would come up. Because, of course, he was in the paper a lot. Maybe he was at a church service. Maybe he was having a wedding. Maybe it was a revival they were going to have, so he ended up being in the paper a lot. But, of course, that made me think, wonder who else I could search for my family. So I started searching my papa and mama, Pap's mother and father, I started searching them. And I was surprised the stuff that I found about them. Now, this would have been about this time frame in the early 40s and the late 30s. And it led me on this whole little journey. Anyway, I won't tell you all that. But about these different places that they lived, because it's almost like, you know, I've never been one. It's strange. I talk about my life in Appalachia, but I've never been one of those people that's really into the social media as far as saying, you know, going to a party today or had the kid's birthday party or something like that. My talk online has all been about Appalachia, and sometimes my family plays into that, but never like a focus about us. But that is a lot of people for social media. That is what it is, like sharing birthday pictures from the party we had today, or happy birthday to my husband, he's this old today, you know, something like that, or went to the best concert, look at these pictures, kind of a detailed day-to-day, you know what I'm talking about. Well, I found it really interesting in those papers, and I knew this previously, but didn't really realize it went that far back. They were, I guess, papers were looking for something to print, so they had kind of people in each community that would submit stuff that just told what was going on in the community. So maybe it would be one that just a heading that said Brasstown, and it would kind of just tell, like, so-and-so went to visit somebody, they had company, they got a new car, they got a new house, you know, just little personal details like that. And so when I was looking through that, a lot of what I found was under one of those headings, which was Brasstown was one of them. Makes sense. This is where we live. And I knew, you know, there's kind of like these people are moving in different little areas, even Opal and Ben. I know Pap's family did that. Like, he took me to some of the places just in a, you know, not too big of a radius where they lived in this area of Brasstown. Anyway, but one of the headings was Midway. And I was like, Midway? Where's Midway? It led me on this whole journey. But what I'm trying to say was I found it so interesting that it's the same kind of details, like Mama and Papa, they lost their house, so they had to move to this log cabin. And you remember it's down there by, in this one part she says, you know where the peach orchard is. Just those little personal details. I've never been to where Opal's at, so it's not like I know those places. But I just love that descriptiveness of telling the movement of people, is what I'm trying to say. I took a long way around just to say that, didn't I? But the movement of people, I think, is fascinating. And people still move like that today. Now, my family has not moved like that. I guess Matt would have, his history would be like where he lived in maybe 3 or 4 places in Haywood County with his dad and mother, and then just his daddy mostly. And then he moved here. But then we've been here for 30 years. My growing up years, we lived over in Martins Creek when I was born, and then we moved here to Wilson Holler. And other than when I left to find Matt, you know, I've been here. But even that somebody looking back at history would be like, wonder why she went to Haywood County. Oh, she went there to work, and then she met her husband. So I just think all those little details are really, really fascinating. I hope you enjoyed this part of the book too. Please leave a comment and tell me what jumped out at you. And as always, I hope you'll drop back by next Friday. We've got to see what happens to Opal next.